For the first time in nearly a quarter century, a pope will visit Asia. Pope Francis is set to arrive in South Korea in the hours to come. He will hold a youth rally in Seoul and beatify more than 100 Korean martyrs. The Catholic Church was a haven for pro-democracy fugitives during the country's military dictatorship in the 1980s. Asia as a whole is a region of vigorous growth for the Church. In South Korea alone, the number of members has doubled since 1990. More than 10% of the population is Catholic. Joining us now with more about the Pope's trip to Asia is Father Edward Beck, a commentator and analyst who is kind enough to join us from time to time. He's the host of the program This Sunday Mass. Thanks so much for being with us. The vast majority of people in South Korea are not Catholics, and yet this is a very important country for the Church. Why is that?
Well, John, because it's growing so much. They've been adding about 100,000 Catholics a year since the 1980s in South Korea. And so what Pope Francis is saying by going there is he's encouraging that growth. But also, as you said, one of the main reasons he's going is for this youth rally. Now, it's just Asian youth, so they're coming from 29 countries. It's not as big as the Brazil youth rally that he went to. And yet it's really significant because of the growth of this country, and he wants to encourage the young people. Because of all the economic growth in South Korea, the young people are struggling. I mean, they have a great educational system, but with all of these advances, you may not know, and some don't know, that it has the highest rate of juvenile suicide in the world. South Korea does. And so the Pope feels as though he wants to encourage the youth there to stay the course and to deal with some of these issues.
I want to ask you about the beatification of martyrs, because there's a very long story there. I'm wondering if you could tell us who these people are, why they're important to the Church, and why this may or may not resonate today with some of those young people you're talking about.
Yeah, well, in the late 1800s, mid-1800s, 124 over the course of some years were martyred for their faith because they refused to follow the rites of Buddhism and Confucianism. And so it was an oppressive regime, and they were martyred. And so finally, they are being given the recognition of beatification and probably eventually canonization. But why it's so important is that Pope Francis wants to shine the light on martyrdom and oppression everywhere for Christians right now. As we know, it's happening in Iraq, it's been happening in Syria, all throughout the Middle East. And so to shine the light on it here says that this is a common issue still today that we need to address. In some ways, North Korea, 300,000 Christians have simply disappeared from the 1950s till now in North Korea. So some are saying he's also speaking to what's happening in North Korea and on other parts of the globe where Christians continue to be oppressed.
He's also, I think, reminding Koreans of a proud chapter in the Church's history in Korea when it sheltered the dissidents who fought for democracy. Once again, I wonder how many young Koreans are even remembering that time or are acquainted with the Church's role.
Well, some attribute the growth of Catholicism to exactly what you're saying. This was not a missionary country. They didn't have missionaries from outside coming in to convert the Koreans. They had gotten books about 2 centuries ago, books on Catholicism. They began reading them. They were really drawn to Catholicism. But it was then the work of the Church with regard to social justice to go against the oppressive regimes there that began to resonate with the people, and they rallied around the faith because they saw it as a faith that was with them in that struggle. So indeed, that's been a very important part of the history of Catholicism in South Korea.